Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for the organization to invite us. We are a GAFPA, Belgian office, as was already introduced. This is the place we work. It's a factory in Ghent. It's quite a nice place in the sense that we have a lot of space. This is the gathering, the meeting space, but we work also in this environment. And tonight we were invited to think about or to present a few obsessions, inspirations, things we think about when we design. And we talked about this in the office, and in a way we decided not to separate these inspirational images or references in separately from the projects, because we believe that they're almost always intertwined with the things we do with the projects as we present them, and because there are so many references, art, architecture, but everything we see basically, that it's very difficult for us to isolate some things. But what we did was, like we said, we showed 3 images, and these projects obviously are also in the presentation. But we did decide to introduce one extra project, and it is a book we're working on already for now for a year, and it shows a bit the things we're interested in. It's a book that came about by doing a lecture series within the framework of the primary structure. It's the course we're teaching at the KU Leuven, and within this lecture series we invite people that interest us, and sometimes they're architects, but a lot of times they're not architects, but they're engineers or artists or photographers and so on, because we like to mix things. We like to kind of see what interests us and kind of try to find things we relate to. And yeah, somehow it is, you can find it in our projects, all these references mingled together. And this book is a cooperation of our office with Maarten van den Dries. He's an architectural critic, Aglaia Conrad, Bert Huygen, primary structure, which is the course we're teaching, and then Arthur Hageman, which is the graphic artist. And we see all of these players as key contributors to this book. And a few images I have. This is the cover of the book, which is made by Arthur. And the first artist we invited was Aglaia Conrad, a Belgium-based artist. It's quite interesting. She's making for quite some time photography. She makes photographs of. She has a whole catalog of architectural references, brutalist concrete buildings. But for example, for this project, she went to the Carrara quarries. But what is interesting is that is the method she uses. What we always like is and that's why we invite these people. We invite them to talk about their work, but especially about how they make their decisions, and that's what inspires us. In a way, it's a different medium, but basically it's the same thing. I mean, you have to produce work, and we are always interested, if we like the work, how does it come to being. And here, for example, she makes photographs, but the way she superimposes the things together makes the new work. So, for example, for this, it's a 60mm film she projected in the lecture of a house, La Scala. And it's superimposed of 2 images, 2 films actually, which register the house. But the nice thing is that because it's a silent movie, it's just simply projected next to each other. What is interesting is that by seeing the movie, there are accidentally very beautiful situations. So things she couldn't have envisaged, but just came about by making this decision to combine these 2 movies. And what is interesting is that, again, it's for her it's one decision she makes, and the work is kind of accepting of what comes about. And for example, this is 2 times the landscape, which you can see from the Villa La Scala. Another yeah, it's cut away on the bottom, I see. Okay, but you can imagine the rest. So this is a picture of a Belgian painter, is Bert Huygens. It's a quite young painter, which we liked. He has a quite primitive, basic approach. In this series, he investigates on his fascination with football shirts, simply because he liked football. But it's really nice. I mean, it's a shame. I mean, this is just a projection, but you should see the image itself, the way it's painted layer after layer. So it's a very simple, basic image, and it draws back on this theme. But if you see the series and the way he does everything, including even the frame he makes himself, it's quite an interesting image. He has also a lot of humor in his work. I think this work speaks for itself. Well, we actually really like it, and that's something that I think we do architecture, but we love art and painting especially. So a lot of things come to continuously looking at these things, and it's not a direct reference and things you can use, but it's a way of working that inspires us. This is his atelier. And then there's the teaching, which is quite interesting to combine, obviously, next to the practice. And we founded an academic design office, which we called Primary Structure, and we work with students for 3 years now. And what we do is we usually start by mapping things, like looking at things, like it could be the context, but could be also existing structures and so on, and really drawing it as it is. And we investigate a lot of time, and it was quite strange for students. I mean, we had some workshops we've done over the years, and then I always have to explain to students, like, draw the existing situation, and like in a few hours it's done, and then it turns out it's not, that they don't understand what's going on, and we really need weeks of investigation to really understand how it works, both structurally and materially, why the choices have been made, and so on. We do a lot of anonymous architecture also that we investigate in. And it teaches them to understand how architecture comes to being, and we really want to demystify the idea of like the genius architect, but to really emphasize on how things grow in a kind of logical way. And we then, after doing this research, we try to take things from the research and turn it into a building. And they have the freedom to, if it's an existing building, to completely demolish parts of it and build something new. But they have to learn something from it. And it kind of takes away the emphasis of trying to have a style or something that, okay, how do you want to do your architecture? I mean, it's like we try to completely erase it and really focus on the problems that are in the site or in the program and so on. And what we do also is to make a kind of a blog, which is also with the graphic designer we work with, to combine all this research, these fragments, into one continuous blog where you can do searches and so on. So we like also the idea of continuity, of students being able to like learn from other projects, because we don't like the idea that somebody does a good project and it's gone and the next one starts from a clean sheet. We try to build something that passes this kind of knowledge on. This is, for example, a registration of the World Trade Center, which we did in the real estate workshop summer school 2 years ago already. And this is the foundation. Again, very something you would forget, for example. But these students really registered what was going on there and drawn a 3D model of the core, basically, of this very high skyscraper. So this is the part which is underground. And it is not architecture, it's not something that you can readily use, but still it inspires us a lot to look at this, how these very strange things come from the simple act of building with all the complexities of the forces going on and so on, and the decisions made. They're all in this drawing. And then we kind of every year we make a publication which is automatically generated out of the blog, so it's something we don't have to lay out and so on. It's just a system where you can draw this out. So it's also interesting that even the design or the layout of the graphic things, it's to us it's one big thing. It's one. We try to have it also integrated in the working process. So this to say, this is, for example, one of the things we're working on, and this book will be presented next year, early next year. So I will show a few projects now and try to go a bit into the logic of each project and the way it was built, because these are the things that interest us a lot and we like to talk about this. So the first project is a renovation project in Ghent-Brugge. It's the region of Ghent. This is a project for a carpenter, a friend of ours. And yeah, basically he had a very interesting site, but he didn't have a lot of money, which is often the case. But then the nice thing is that he's a carpenter, so I mean the choice of material wasn't that difficult. We said, okay, we do it in wood. The site was an old stone quarry, this was the situation before something happened. Well, he managed to buy it quite cheaply because there was no garden and so on. So people think, okay, we can't live here. But when we stripped everything and we demolished a part of the floors, we managed to make a garden. But what we particularly liked about the situation was that it's like, again, it has a lot of layers. I mean, you had the original concrete structure, and then somebody came along and built a steel structure in it because he needed a bigger hall. And we figured ourselves to be in the same way of working. I mean, we needed a covered structure which was to be insulated to make a house. So we imagined the idea of a third structure within it. And then we made this image which kind of shows the different layers. So we like the idea of the concrete which was there, the steel put in, and a third material which was wood. So everything should be wood, we thought. And also interesting is that we analyzed the situation and we took the grid, the rhythm of the original structure, and we implemented it in our construction, because we like the subtle changes. If you look at the first picture, you see the steel columns which rest against the concrete columns, but there's a slight shift, and then we do the same in the wood. So you have this kind of layering of three times the same bay system, but still there's like a subtle shift in them. And this is actually student work, but I like to show it to show the different layers that are present. And this is then the plan. We like it that the plan makes itself, so we don't have to do it. So it's like we took the length of the wall, the brick wall which was there, and then we have obviously followed the rhythm of the columns, which are the rhythms of the wooden columns. And then, which was important, of course, is that we made it a lot smaller, so we made a kind of passage by, and the wooden structure is protected by the canopy, which is also interesting if you work in wood, that it is under a canopy, so that you don't have to treat it, and it's a kind of fragile material, which in that case you can easily use. And then important to say is also we only made the structure, and we said, okay, to our friend the carpenter, you can do all the rest. So we didn't even design a stair, we just gave in a hole, and then he had to make the rest in it. And we like this idea, the idea that as an architect you can just simply provide space, and then the client or everybody who comes in can make it himself. And it's the same as we're doing with the old concrete and steel structure. So basically it's the same with another layer. And here you can see, but what we try to do is to break it down to the elements, to the kind of bare basics, in the sense that we made a concrete plate, and we said, okay, we don't want discussion about the floor. What type of floor do you want? That's usually this problematic situation as an architect. You want it like this, and data like that, and so on. we don't like these discussions, so we said, okay, we just make you a floor, which is the foundation, and we polish it, and so that's your floor. And then, but it's something easily said, but then with the engineer we really needed to think, because we needed the heating, which is laid on top of the wired, the metal. And obviously if it heats, it's 20 meters long, this building, it would break because of the heating in the concrete. So we had to divide it in 3 parts. It's an industrial system, so it can move a bit, but not vertically. So also nice, I always like the idea that your building moves. I mean, if your engineer talks, I mean, it's like, for us it's static, but for them it's like it can move, but to a certain degree. And this is then the drawing of the engineer, which I always like to show. This is Arthur de Rover. This is quite a good engineer to work with. We developed a relationship with him, and the interesting is that he understands our quest for the bare minimum. And in that sense, he drew, like I already said, the foundation as the finished floor, and the intermediate floors are simply, I think it's only 4 centimeters of wood, which is more like as if it were floorboards as a finishing, but this time it's structural. And so it's already the finishing of the ceiling as it is the finishing of the floor. And it's 2 times the exact same thing, and then we insulate and provide glass on the side. And here you can see then the structure as it is standing there. And we like the idea that somebody comes along, the next one, demolish the windows and everything, but keeps the structure and gives it a new life. This is the entrance from the street. You have this courtyard, and then you can go into the building. And it's nice, it's a story I always tell, is that now you can see here is the front door. We actually didn't want a front door. It's like we said, actually we want you to come through the front gate and you enter the first door on the left, but already here on this side, because we imagined this as a kind of extension of the living space. But then we established, of course, with the client the idea, okay, no, the door is a ceremonial thing, you need it just simply to invite the guests. So, but it just translates a bit the idea of how we try to diminish it to the bare minimum, what do you really need, and then how this negotiation with a client goes and brings extra complexity to the project. Also, we did the windows in a full material and the glass, obviously transparent, with the idea of when it's summertime, you open up the shutters and you get a fully transparent transparency from the inside. Also, they for now they had 2 children, and but we imagined rooms they could make in there, but for now they didn't do it. They just kept the one big space on top, so the children can have a lot of room to play. So it challenges a bit these kind of ideas. We need very small closed spaces. Because you start with the structure, also a client is going to think, what do I really need to inhabit this space? So you get a more interesting relationship with the building. The next project is a house in Ledenberg. It's a house of one of the partners of us. And the situation is by the street. This is the building. It's 3 building layers, and in the back there was an old, kind of a silk screen factory. While the top layers are to be rented, so it's the ground floor that needed to be optimized. This was the situation which we found. The situation of a structure was really not interesting, or at least not to keep. Some structural elements were interesting. And then what we did was to introduce a rectangle, the biggest rectangle possible, and the patios or the left spaces are the outside space which was kept. So we tried always to have a kind of a simple basic idea of how to make the structure, and we like the complexity that arises from this choice. And here you can see this is a street where you can enter the house on the ground floor through the garage, and then you have like this which works autonomous for the top layers. So you have a totally different approach to the house. And what we already did is to have this as an in-between space. This is actually the house, but you have like this succession of spaces from the street. And what we did was we introduced a project with one column which supports the roof, the wooden beams. And then we separated two spaces with like insulating stones, which I will show. And then you have a fully glazed facade on all sides. And this is the construction site. So this was the insulating stone, which is quite a very fragile stone, something, you normally use it only for the bottom part, but we used it for the whole building. And then contractors are really not used to this. So like if you cut stone, for example, next to it, it's very porous. It gets into the stone. So you really need to like cover it or make sure that nothing gets onto it during the construction site. And then this is the one column supporting the beams. And what we did was like we laid the wooden beams on top of the primary beams, but we made a detail which we hung the construction from the main beams to optimize how we got the light in there. And obviously these stones are not suited for the pressures of the beams. So wherever they touched, we needed to introduce concrete pieces. And then this is a bit the situation as this is finished. When you enter the garage or the in-between space, you then see, well, the main space from there. So also you get this layering effect I was talking about here in the same way. We kind of respect what is there and we add stuff, and that way you get a kind of complex whole. This was when we were still moving, or he was still moving. And these are the in-between spaces, which are not large, but still it's fascinating how as small as they are, they get really a lot of light in there. And it's nice because of their different shapes, which we didn't design, which was simply there. It gives a kind of interesting inside-outside relationship to the building. This is his cat. He's called Patrick. Then the weekend house in Wachtebeke, which was already mentioned. It's quite an older project, but I like to show it because it was well, an early project of us. But the interesting thing is that it was a quite special situation. This is the site which was the end of housing, and then where the nature started. It's an agraric situation, and we had to make a building there, and we were quite, well, basically, if we could choose, you would like say, okay, we don't build anything there. It's actually better than building something, but okay, it's a question that you need to make a house there, but it was special in the sense that it was a weekend house. Which meant that it didn't have the same requirements as a permanent house. And I remember when we were there, we wanted we said to each other, how can we make it visible in the house that it is almost temporary? Because, well, you build and you can choose whether to really fix something for like eternity, let's say, or to make something that touches the earth as lightly as possible. And in that sense, we said, okay, let's make something that is lifted above the ground and make it in wood. It made quite sense to us. it's also something I like to say. People say, okay, you like to do it in wood, and sometimes our engineer also says, yeah, you do everything in wood. It's not like that. We simply say project by project, what makes sense, what material makes sense here. So in this case, it was obviously wood, and we had to also to think of a form of making something that opened up to the nature and kind of closed off to the street, which was a question for the client. But we wanted to draw the nature as much in as possible, and that's why the U shape came about, to draw in the nature as deep as possible. And this was the image we made, and it was a quite naive image in the sense that we just made this collage with the idea of making a structure which was derived from the measurements of a plywood material. And we made it very slender, and in Photoshop it's very easy to do. But then we came to our engineer, and then obviously we thought about it, but it's something that, like this, what we like is this friction between something you envision and something you want, and something like, okay, what can we do? And but it's very interesting how to fix this, that what comes about is not a compromise, but makes it better, makes it more complex, makes it somehow unexpected. And that to us is also very, always very intriguing. And also what is important here is that we wanted to extend the frame, the metal frame, to cover the two terraces. So you could like choose where you wanted to sit, and the space of the terrace is not that big, but the generosity is in the height you get. And here you see the plan again. The interior is in 3-core plywood, and the outside is in insulated wooden structure with cellulose. And the rhythm, like I said, is derived from the wooden plywood material. And it is very, well, for example, if I give the example of the stair, for example, you have the kitchen, you have like the table, and it was so dense that we couldn't fit a stair in there. So we thought, okay, we take the smallest round stair you could possibly make, but if you would make them here, it would obstruct the table. If you put them here as a cutout of your of the floor plate, you would obstruct the kitchen. So we put it half in half. So we cut out the plate and to make room for this stair. And for us, it's like when there's friction, when it's really like you cannot shift it 1 millimeter to the left or to the right, it kind of feels, okay, this is what it has to be. So that's always an interesting moment for us to make decisions. It's also something that has grown because we are 3 partners. We always have to discuss. You cannot say, I like this, I want this. No, you have to kind of make a discussion. And I like this, because that makes the strongest idea survives. And this is the first thing we did. We planted a tree, because the landscape architect had a tree, and he said, okay, I have to do something with it. We said, okay, you give it to us. And we planted it first, and it was a nice moment, because normally you start digging and pouring concrete, but here we started with a tree. It was the right season for it, and we built a house around it. And it made us think also with the engineer of how to make the lightest possible foundation. And for this project, we came up with the idea of the prefabricated T elements, which we dug into the ground, because the soil was not bearing enough. So we needed to go 2 meters deep for good foundation. So this was an interesting, because it's an industrial element, it's cheap, but obviously these things you learn when you do this. For a contractor, it's very hard to do this, because you have to make them perfectly aligned. Well, the building basically rests on these T elements, but on the top they're like 5 centimeters thick, and then 1.20 meters, but it's very narrow, and then you have to align your wooden structure to it and so on. So like, it's cheap in buying, but it's like very hard to do. It's something we've learned over the years that it's, yeah. So here you see again the structural drawings. And And then you can see that the building is floating on these concrete pillars. And it's a very light building. And to be honest, when it was built, I drove by a lot of times, and when it was windy, I always was like scared it would not stay, because it was so fragile. And I like this idea. I mean, it's not nice to be awake from your building, but it's like it shows that it's like, we like this fragility. It's like you feel that it's exactly what needs to be done, and it's nothing more than that. And obviously, it gives it a kind of slender quality. And here you can see the foundations when they're filled up. It's almost like a cemetery. And then you have like the wooden structure. And then also one detail, that's what we like. So these, we finish it to that it's like, okay, we have our wall system, and exactly the same size we make the glass system, and we fix it with a U-shaped profile. And this U-shaped profile is like the graphic element you see in the facade. So we do need it, but it's not structural. And it's something that is always interesting, this ambiguity about what is structural, about what you see and what is not. So in a sense, it's hidden behind what is structural, but at the same time, it emphasizes this grid. And here you see a bit the facade, and we did these perforated metal to give a filter to the outside. Also the landscape, we didn't really have a lot of discussions with the landscape designer. At one time, he just put these stones there, and we were really happy with it. But really, I like this idea. If you find people where you can really work together with them and trust what they're doing, there's no better thing than just let them do what they're good at. I really like this. It gives it, you can all, as an architect, you can try to control everything, and you want to say, okay, we do this, but we say we're not good at this. I mean, let somebody else do it. And it's always better to find these different forces in one project. Here you see the cutout stair, which I talked about. And also the stair, it's, the engineer looked at it and said it's okay, because we just drawn it very, very narrow or slender. And then when you walk on top of it, it moves a little. It is like really, and also this, yeah, it kind of makes sense in this house. That, I mean, we're used to so many safety levels that at a certain moment, like, there's no real feeling anymore of these things. And maybe in a weekend house, you can go a bit further than in a real house. Some pictures. I always like to go back, because now it's really, they're planting some trees more and more, and so it's growing into this small forest, and it's always nice to have this project which continues very nicely. And maybe it's interesting to say, because this is one of the images we put into the three that we were asked to give. We kind of, almost all the images we made ourselves, and I say we because it's really like that. I mean, somebody presses the button, but we have discussions together, which is a good image, which is not a good image, and so on. But it gives you a kind of freedom. In the beginning, it was necessary simply because you don't have the money to pay a photographer. But it gradually came about that it's actually nice to look at your own building and try to register what you think is elementary to it. And it also gives you new inspiration for other things. And you have more involvement in this. And that's quite important for us, to do this over the years, and we continue to do it. A bigger project, it's the Nature Center in Knokke, Heist. It's a project we did together with Kusei Goris Architects. I always show it because it's a big project, but it's also very important for us in the sense that it was a very interesting collaboration with an office which was another generation, a bigger office, So we had this kind of sparring partner, so somebody you can really talk to, and this friction between ideas, which turned out to be really fruitful, I would say. And it was quite a unique site. This is, well, the north part of Belgium with the North Sea. And you had this quite a big, well, area, a nature environment. And they asked us to make, well, a nature center. And this is the image of the finished building already. And I think I left it out, yes. Ah, no, this one. This is actually the first image we made for this project when we found the day it was like we always do a lot of very, very bad ideas, and then at the moment we're like, okay, this is it. And this was this type of moment, and well, it's actually a long story, but maybe it's interesting to tell that the first idea was we had a very complex project, and we were intrigued by a project of I'm forgetting the artist. I will maybe get onto it, but it's a very famous work where this artist walked 100 meters in the desert to form one line. I don't know whether somebody can help me with the name. Richard Long. Thank you very much. So and why was it so important? When we went there, it's a very big, very long, landscape. So we had the feeling you cannot do something which is too formally special. It should make sense there. And what we did there was simply walk. You had to walk for miles and miles and miles. And this idea, together with this artwork, gave us the idea, okay, let's try to make a building which is simply one narrow strip, and we try to fit all the program in there. But because the program was too complex, we couldn't manage. But we tried to resist, and at a certain moment you think, okay, we have to do something. So what we did is, instead of one line, we took 4 lines, which got their own thickness and heights according to the program, and then we combined these together to form a shape which allowed all these different functions to happen. And what we did was, in the office we had some plywood laying around, and just in half an hour we made this model. And the nice thing is that this model is still exactly what it is today in its basic sense. And that is quite important for us, and we tried to have this idea. We believe that if you can fix it in this kind of simplicity, and that it achieves its complexity through working the program and doing everything till the end, but still holding on to this basic idea, you get a strong building. And that's the image today, so you can feel the similarity, obviously. And this is the site, the drawing, where you can see that we pushed the building all the way to the bottom side to leave as much space of the landscape as possible. And we also made a slender building in the dike, I think that's the English word, to look at the birds there. Also here, well, I don't have time to really go into the project, I think, but it's nice that we made a courtyard. The idea of you go, you see the building, you go behind it, this building makes sure that you don't see the landscape anymore. Then you go in between, and then you see it again. So you take it away and you give it back, and you get this kind of courtyard feeling before you enter the building. So it makes you appreciate the landscape again. That was kind of the idea. And this is then, it's totally based on the 125 meters, all wooden beams together. And the idea of the slenderness, these are very narrow volumes, is that you have as much contact with the nature as possible, in the sense that everybody is at the window. That was kind of the basic idea. And here you see the plans, where you can still see the different volumes, obviously, and the way we solved it. And when you approach the building, come closer, and this is the moment where you go into the courtyard. And it was it was interesting to think about the variations of wood as cladding, as structure, all these different type of in-between situations that are used to solve all the problems of the building. And we like to make it black because it was a reference to the black painted barns that you can find in the environment. And it was said that, well, I was told that there are now birds on top of these pillars, which is quite important if you make them, that it is inhabited. So this is the central hallway, which we made in concrete. And from this you can actually go to the different areas. And that was also the way we solved the problem of like the cafeteria needing to be open at different timings, that you can still enter the park and so on. So we had like a very difficult program, which we managed to solve to really simply have every program in a different shape, actually. And this is the exhibition area, which is interesting because the engineer, this is Guy Mouton, also quite a famous engineer in Belgium. We made a very long, narrow strip for the exhibition. Again, the exhibition we envisioned as a kind of a walk through this exhibition, but it's a very long and high ceilinged space. And then the engineer had the problem of the wind forces on this very narrow shape. So he had to kind of, these columns, they pull the forces. They don't support the ceiling, but they actually pull. So it's like the reverse. And he made this kind of shape, which he needed to resist the forces. And again, this is something at the start, we resisted it until we were really sure that it was needed. That was not some kind of idea to make the space special, but it was really something, yeah, simply needed. And then you feel something is happening, something makes, it animates the space, obviously. And in the end, that is the character. But it's something we don't start with. And I really think for us, it's important not to already start with these ideas. I mean, it's something that simply comes from the choices you make. A house in Ghent. Again, we do a lot in the environment of Ghent. So this is the situation. You have these two houses you can see there, which had to be demolished and turned into a house. This was the first collage we made. What we thought was, okay, what do we need to make this house? We take two walls, which we obviously need, and then we make shelves, and we put like wooden shelves in between to make the different rooms. I have a kind of a split level to fix this. And it was something, it was an idea we liked because we had like these different elements which you could still clearly see. And you could almost take a shelf out to have a double height space and so on. And then we also fixed there was an angle in the street, so what we did was we went perpendicular on in between the two walls, and we closed the facade to the street in one plane, so you had the kind of a triangular space in between the different facades. This is then the section, and then it was too expensive. It's always like that. And then we had to go back and think, what can we do? So it turned out to be 20% cheaper if we did it in concrete. So there was like no discussion, and we made it like that. But it's something we don't, I would say it's not a problem for us. I mean, we're like used to these things, and the basic idea is more important to us than these kind of evolutions in the project. I mean, we still have, basically for us it's the same. Obviously it's a different material. And the front facade, we looked for a way of doing it. It was not easy, as you saw in the beginning. You could see a different type of material or something that we envisioned to make it. It was the idea of making concrete blocks, putting them on the side and have a transparency. It was a reference to the Rietveld pavilion. I don't know whether you know it in Holland. but it was not possible. So we got the cheapest material we could find. These are things they make terraces with. And the nice thing is that it's very slender. It's 10 centimeters, and it's quite transparent. And then the engineer envisioned the cross to stabilize the structure because it's completely freestanding. I mean, it's 10 centimeters wide, but it's 8 meters high, or 7 meters. So it's like, it's very thin. It's almost like, you could say, like paper, well, in reference to the material, of course, but in thinness. The bay windows are obviously a kind of resulting factor of like putting the shelves from one side to the other, and then we built in front of it this kind of filter because it was on the south side, and also you had like a traffic problem there, so it was something to make this in between. And here you can see it being built. And it's a quite cheap material, but it's nice to combine all these different layers into one building. And well, when the morning sun is on there, it's like illuminating the whole building, which gives it a nice pattern. Also nice that they put the letterbox in front of it. These are all things the way they use it. And at night, obviously, it reverses and it gives a kind of transparency in the other way. And this is the situation. And from the back, you had this double height space, obviously, as a living room, and then the whole space comes from there. And it's a house where you can see all the decisions made, all the layers. Because the space in between is very narrow, you can almost touch each other from the different rooms. So it's like one big space. A project which is housing development, something we do a lot more these days. It's an interesting theme, we think. This is a project, again, with Cousin and Goris architects, Portischanda in Ghent. It's in the historic center. And this is the place, I mean, just to show how it presents itself in the city. It's quite a big, it's actually this concrete building and then a parking building on the back. And the question of the brief was to demolish the parking building and the back part of this concrete T-shaped building, and to renovate the rest and provide a master plan for the situation. And as you can see here in the early model of what it was before, you see a kind of CM type of building, which is a bit awkward placed next to the water, which is here. And you feel that it has no attachment to the city. And it's quite important because up until now, it was a site that was really difficult in the center, that you can really feel that something is like blocking the connection in between the neighborhoods and so on. So we had to try to fix it. And here you can see the situation. Nice thing is that it's related to the different churches in the historic center. And in Ghent, it wasn't easy to build a high building. So there was a law which prevented anybody to build higher than this church. And so they're very rare. So in that sense, it's a very special project that it's such a high building and still so dense in the city center. So our job was to make this building more connected to the site. And we thought very long about this problem. And we weren't, well, we felt we had to do something to change the shape of this building, because the rectangle, the way it was made, pressed against the river and so on, it didn't feel right. So we felt we had to do something, but we simply didn't manage to be able to make a form, to make a shape. I mean, we're like, we try not to do this. We like it that a shape comes from something. And what we basically found was like, okay, let's make 4 towers against this old structure. So we kind of took away the facade and have the clear structure. And we attached on the 4 sides kind of a tower. And what it did was like, it gave it, and yes, important to say is that we combined it with a shape which was now, we did it also in the office quite fast. To have the kind of sense of the shape, we combined it with these elastics to see what kind of shape would arrive. And these in-between shapes, that became the terraces which you need in this kind of project. But the 4 towers represented the idea of to add a room in every floor. And it was an important idea because here you can see this, what you normally have in this type of building, you have a very one-dimensional relationship with the outside. You have a building which is closed on the sides, which just simply has like, okay, these apartments all have like the same terrace, which is one-dimensionally looking at the towers. But what we did is by adding these rooms, we got like L-shaped apartments, which are very interesting in this type of situation, because you normally can do this on the ground. You have villas and so on. And the nice thing is that you can look onto your own building and having this kind of intimate in-between shapes, these triangular terraces, which become your own in a sense. And we did it on all sides, so because we had the problem that the engineer said you cannot break open this facade in terms of structure, so we could only make a small opening, and by adding a room you can have like full transparency again on all sides. So then you can see the shape and you can feel the shape of the streets echoed in the building, and how it kind of tries to attach itself again to the medieval surroundings. And then we made a master plan for the buildings behind it and a new park which is connected to the square, which is here on the front. And what we liked is that we got slender facades again, which was a problem a bit before, but now we have these very narrow strips on all sides which are formed by the towers. And it was, in a way, when we were doing this competition, we went to Milan for an office trip, and we were really charmed by these beautiful buildings there with these like generous terraces with a lot of green. And they were very inspiring to us. So we tried to make something which had these kind of qualities in itself. And this is then the in-between space which I talked about. So you have, when you're very high on top of this on a building, you want to be on the terrace but not have the feeling that you could fall off. So we really wanted to make this world in some way more intimate, more closed. And here you can see, which we also liked, is that you had the concrete structure, and what we do is we add the metal structure, so you have the layering of the different materials again. And also this is very interesting to use the old building together with the new, and it becomes a new complex whole. A project in Sint-Amansberg, which was an extension. It was a quite small project, but we really like to do these things simply because we have like much more freedom instead of in big projects. And the question was simply to make a kitchen, to make a kind of a living space attached to an old row housing project, and we wanted to make it as generous as possible. We want to have a kind of competition with the old spaces, which are quite high and have their own character. So, but by regulations, obviously, we couldn't make a very high ceiling. So we made an angled, a roof, basically. And we thought about the structure, and we came up with the idea of to make a stiffened central beam, which held up the forces. So you don't have to make a kind of connection here and here to the sides. And we made a kind of Vierendeel truss, which gave us the opportunity to make a skylight here, which came from one of the three parts which we made into a light. And we rested onto a beam and we extended the roof to form a kind of a porch. And here you can see the plan again, just simply trying to find a connection with the old, in the sense that we had this structural line which we simply copied and continued in the new building. We had a friction here with the stairs, so there we made a window on this side, and that kind of formed the building. And here we can see, as I said, the complexity of the window, which we made into the place to attract light, and the porch, which was extended to form a covered terrace. And this is the vierdeeltras, which I really like, because it's a kind of very... the engineer thought, okay, what do I need where? I need to stiffen this, so here he made the diagonal, and here we didn't want the diagonal because it was the window, so he had to weld a plate to make it stiffened, and this thickness fixes also the thickness of the roof. So these are two different situations, or two different types of ways of stiffening this Vierdeel truss, and that's why it can be so slender. We actually wanted, the whole project was made to be able to fit through the front door, and everything was fixed, but then it was too heavy, so they had to put it over the roof. And here they're making the project with insulated wooden panels laid on top of the steel structure. And again, this with the construction workers, we talked, and they said it was difficult to make. And we thought it's very logic. Why? And they said because this element is not stiffened in itself. It needs the two wooden plates to kind of stabilize the structure. So again, it's nice that the parts, the different parts separately are not stable, but the whole is. And then you see the project. One of the last projects, it's a sports center in Langemunte we're doing right now. It was a question of making new spaces, dressing rooms and stuff like that, added to an existing sports center. It was quite a utilitarian assignment, but we liked it because it was an interesting landscape which we managed to work in. Here you can see one of the early drawings we made, a collage, and this is the existing building. And the only thing we did was like making one line actually to house all the program. And we adopted the material of the existing, the exact same red brick, because the only thing that mattered to us was like the roof itself, again, as one line, which makes a combination and which provides a covered walkway throughout the whole project. And another special thing was that, well, the brief was very specific. You could not build against the existing building, which was from a quite famous architect. It's Bob van Reet. It's a Belgian architect. But we ignored it and we glued it against the old building, which was the only thing that felt right for us. Because there was an additional thing that we could, there were like windows here, but there was no terrace. And by adding it to the existing building, we could provide a terrace to look onto the football fields. So we had felt right because it was interesting in shape, but also because it provided this extra quality. And here you see the plan. And this is then the section where you can see the terrace which is on top of our building, and this floating canopy which goes all the way throughout the building. And because there is like a slope and the football terrains are a lot higher, you can really see better from this side than obviously from below. And this is the view from the back. So again, a very basic idea, but I like the fact that we try to we do glue something to the old, but we feel that it becomes almost stronger in its complexity by adding this than putting something separately next to the building. It's something that intrigues me a lot. Today I got a tour through the EPFL campus, and it kind of struck me that every architect just makes a building next to each other, ignoring the rest. And in a sense, it's so stupid, actually. I mean, just sorry to say, but like it ignores the situation, and you feel everybody tries to do his own thing, but it's like there's no consideration for the whole. For like, okay, what are we doing? What is the master plan of what can we do with this site? And I think usually the best ideas come from simply investigating what is necessary, and not by like what kind of spectacular building can I make here. It's something that interests us not really a lot. But okay, I'm not, well, doesn't matter. And the last project. It's a scenography. We've done a few, which is always very interesting to do because it is, what is interesting to us, it is very fast. You can have an idea and within a few months it's realized. Instead of 7 years, you can have it in 3 months, which is nice. It's temporary, and we always try to make something that is made also very temporary, something that we try to take it as a quality. And this was a project in the Grand Ornu. It's in the French-speaking part of Belgium. It's in an old factory kind of situation. And the title of the exhibition was interesting. It was "Ceci n'est pas une copie." It was an exhibition about design furniture, and it was about the idea of copying. Everybody copies everybody else, and there's always this kind of problematic situation of who stole from who and so on, whilst everybody steals from everybody. But anyway, that was like the idea of the exhibition. But what we liked was obviously the reference to Magritte, which is a Belgian surrealist artist, with the famous sentence "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," we like to do something with it. And there's also Magritte influenced Brotaars. Marcel Brotaars is also a Belgian artist. I don't know whether you know him. He's a very good one, I think. And he also played on this. What Magritte did is he played on the difference, obviously, about in between a word and an image. And Brotaars took it also one step further. And he constantly played with this duality in between words, what they mean. What is interesting is that he made the work casserole de moule. It's like sea mussels, like in a pot. And it's a very Belgian work, and it's like really famous. The nice thing is that he had this idea of like a sea mussel is a kind of covering of, actually what's good about the sea mussel is what is inside, obviously. But the shape itself, the protection itself, is a shape in itself. And he thought of like sculptures which are always made in molds, like old sculptures. They have a mold, and then you have like the positive, the real sculpture. So the mold is something you make to be able to make the sculpture, and the mold is not important. It's something that is kind of a waste. But interesting enough, he kind of drew the attention to that as he made this sculpture of the sea mussels in a pot. It's like it's filled with the leftovers of the meal, but it's empty actually at the same time, because I mean the real food is already gone. Long story, but it was interesting to think of this situation where the whole old stables were made of like these round arches. And what we did was we imagined how did they make these arches, and they made obviously a wooden framework to be able to make these arches. And what we did was to try to take this as an idea, as a mold for the real structure that you would say there, and to take it as a one-on-one copy of this framework. And then we put it on the side, and we spread it around the exhibition area. And this was, well, one of the images we found, how they make these frameworks to make an arch. And what we liked is the way to bend the plywood. They had these cut-out shapes of plywood. And we were really intrigued by this form. So again, we didn't have to invent this structural system. It was already there. We simply had to apply it. And the scale was already fixed also because it was a one-on-one copy. And then we just put them on the side, and then obviously the exhibition could take place in there. And it's always something, it's funny, we make this, and then we have to try to solve it, like the exhibition itself. So then there's like this friction, how do you get this furniture in there and so on. But in the end, that's why the two elements are strong in itself. And here you can see some images of what it was. And what we did is we painted it white on the outside, which is a reference obviously to the white arches, and then the inside is simply the structure, how it was made. And here you can see how it is formed. So, and these things, we couldn't arrive at these kind of ideas without this process. Then it would just simply be just invent a nice cabinet or a nice structure, but we're not interested in that. I mean, we really need this process to make something for us that fits the situation. And then I come to my last image. So that's it. Thank you.